Welcome to the LCX blockchain sessions. I've been speaking so much in the last couple of days that I lost my voice. Also traveling a little bit as we are expanding our network globally. And I'm excited that we have another of our advisors here with us today. To give you an overview of what we are going to do, I wanted to welcome you here at the LCX blockchain session. And then we have a special speaker, which I'm going to introduce in a second. And then we'll have a panel with another exciting moderator, Pylarinou, who is the editor and owner of dailyfintech.com, who will be moderating here today. If we think about the blockchain world and the crypto world, for me, it's really a milestone, a tipping point, not only for the financial industry, but for the world as we live in. It feels a little bit like the internet in the early days. And I also believe we are just at the beginning. Every infrastructure, key elements has to be built. New investments are going to be done. And entrepreneurs are taking on this opportunity. 2018, we are at the turning point where we actually see that it's kind of this unregulated Wild West is coming into something which is more sustainable, more kind of regulated, and also entering traditional markets like traditional financial markets, traditional healthcare. How could we leverage the blockchain technology as a whole? And LCX is here to actually create and enable a new wave of institutional investors joining that space. Because we saw that there are a lot of blockages, hurdles, challenges for institutional investors to enter. They had been limited. There's a lack of regulation. There's a lack of the right tools. Also, liquidity is missing. Imagine if a billion-dollar hedge fund would get started and do a couple of trades, tens of millions. The whole market would probably implode in a way that it's not capable of handling these like super large trades. This all comes down to my thesis that it's really just the beginning, and it will be an exciting journey. And so for LCX, we believe really that you can only create what you can imagine. And we'd like to imagine the future together with you today. So I need your engagement, your questions later on. And when we think about creating this future vision, and if you want to create the future together, one key element is essential to build the future of blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and that is trust. We know that trust is kind of built in the system, and we're going to learn a little bit more. But trust needs to be also implemented in the hearts and in the heads of the decision makers. It's a little bit more than just the technology. It's also about finding the right ways to responsibility, regulation, to reliable systems, and also to get the framework right. And talking about trust, there's no better person to talk about it than our guest today. So please welcome Professor Zhang here from Stanford University. So you will be talking about In Math We Trust, and I just hand over the microphone to you. Welcome on stage.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay. Okay, good. So sorry, the date is wrong. But so I'd like to tell you about my thoughts about the future of the blockchain world. I think blockchain is certainly in a very early stage of the development. I believe we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. As you see recently, the market is extremely volatile. So in moments like these, we need to ask deeper questions, like what are the fundamental values that blockchain can provide. So along these lines, it is along these lines that I'd like to share with you my thoughts. So we talk about blockchain and internet and all these things. They're very different from other physical things that we see. And they are basically a form of a medium of exchange. And the question I like to pose is whether medium of exchange has some kind of intrinsic value of its own. So I'm a theoretical physicist, and I like to discuss the concept of the medium of exchange. So this doesn't work on the screen, right? yeah, okay. So, so let me just try to point to it. So let me try to explain to you how the concept of medium exchange arises in the physical world. So I think many of you are all highly educated. I think you certainly know about the Coulomb's law. So when we talk about electricity, we talk about charges. And we know about the basic Coulomb law, that when the charges interact, the like charges repel and unlike charges attract. And they obey some law, very much like Newton's law of gravitation. So when early days we try to discuss the phenomena of electricity, we rely on the fundamental charges which carry electricity and how they interact with each other according to this law. But later, our concepts start to evolve. So the idea about this interaction, first of all, if I have n such particles, I would have roughly n squared pairs of possible interaction. So this is much larger than the number of particles themselves. The number of interactions, pairwise interaction you can have, scales with n squared. So this is a little bit difficult. But also, when you notice that these charges can actually interact with each other at long distance. And that is very counterintuitive. Usually I can interact with you when I start to touch you and feel you, but somehow these charges can interact with each other at a very long distance, very counterintuitive to our daily experience. So in order to solve both of these issues, we actually introduce a concept of medium of exchange, which is the electric field. So we don't say that a charge directly interacts with another charge. We say a charge generates an electric field, and that electric field further acts on another charge. So therefore, the concept of the medium of exchange arises in the physical world. So that, I think, the analogy is quite precise about how a monetary system evolves. Very early on in human civilization, we have the barter economy. So when we do exchanges, we exchange goods for goods. For example, if I'm an apple farmer, I produce some apple, and you're a fisherman, you produce some fish, and we start to have some kind of a pairwise exchange. So the barter economy is like a description of charges in terms of a pairwise exchange. The problem with the barter economy is that it's very inefficient for the exchange to occur. Because in order for this exchange to occur, it requires a double coincidence of wants. You have to happen to want my apple, and I have to happen to want your fish, and the probability is quite low. So then we introduce the concept of a medium of exchange, and namely money, and then we exchange goods for money, and then use money to further exchange for goods. So the money as a medium of exchange is very similar to the concept of electric field as a medium of exchange, and the barter economy is very similar to the idea of the pairwise exchange. But then, very early on, when we introduced the concept of the electric field, it just looks like an auxiliary concept. It helps our description, make our visualization a little bit more intuitive, but it's not a necessary ingredient. It does not seem to have an identity of its own, the concept of electric field. And that lasted for a very, very long time, for almost 200 years. After the concept was introduced, it was always viewed as an auxiliary concept, something that does not have a physical identity of itself and does not have a value itself. But then some great revolution happened in physics, and the realization came that the medium of exchange has some intrinsic value of its own. And that actually is due to the work of Einstein. So you all know that Einstein studied here in ETH, very near here in Zurich, and he discovered special and general theory of relativity. But he didn't receive Nobel Prize for either of these work. He didn't receive Nobel Prize for two of his most famous work, the special and general theory of relativity. He received Nobel Prize exactly for assigning a physical value to the medium of exchange. So this is the famous formula due to Einstein and Max Planck, telling you that the electric field itself has a value, and the value in the physical world is energy. So he actually assigns the energy to the electric field. So we know that the electric field is related to a magnetic field, which is related to electromagnetic field, and light is just a phenomena of electromagnetic field. So red light, which has longer wavelengths and lower frequency, would have lower energy compared to blue light, which have shorter wavelengths and higher frequency. So this idea of the medium of exchange, which was introduced early on as an auxiliary concept, actually acquires some own physical identity. It is a physical object of itself, and not just the charges, but also the electric field itself. And furthermore, it has an intrinsic value. It has a value, and the value in the physical world is just energy, and according to Einstein and Planck's formula, it has some well-defined energy. So I like to pursue this line of thinking when we think about medium of exchange, not in the physical world, but also in the monetary world. What is the intrinsic value of money? Why is some money special compared to other money? And why would the blockchain crypto money be better than other form of money? So actually, as a medium of exchange, the value of money is in its consensus. Okay? So I think this is actually a key insight. So I think very early on, maybe we had different choices for money as a medium of exchange. So you may think that, let's actually for now think that gold does not have that much commodity value of its own. But apple actually has a lot of commodity value. You can eat the apple. So why didn't apple become a medium of exchange, but gold become a medium of exchange? And the problem is that when I say you give me a certain amount of fish and I give you one apple, under the concept of one apple, there's a very broad distribution of what we exactly mean by one apple. It can be a green apple, it can be a red apple, it can be a ripe apple, it's an apple that has been there for longer, then shorter, different quality, and so on. So there's a very, very broad distribution of the concept of one apple. When I say I want to use one apple as a medium of exchange, there's a very broad distribution about assessment about the value of apple, especially in an economy where where it involves people who neither produce apple nor consume apple. It's very hard for them to assess the value or the quality of one apple. But in contrast, when I say if I give you 1 ounce of gold, never mind whether the 1 ounce of gold has intrinsic, has a commodity value of itself or not, we understand very, very precisely what is meant by 1 ounce of gold. So therefore, in the distribution, there's a very sharp distribution. We understand, different people understand, they all agree about what 1 ounce of gold means. They don't agree very well about what 1 apple means. But the reason why gold became gold is actually, again, due to 2 distinguished physicists. One is Archimedes. Perhaps you all know about the story of Archimedes, who lived in Sicily. And one day he was given the task by the king to determine whether the king recently want to fashion a golden crown, and the handyman did fashion a golden crown, but he has some suspicion whether the golden crown is really made out of pure gold or not. But the crown looks so beautiful, he doesn't want to break it to determine whether the crown is actually made out of actual gold or not. So he gave the task to Archimedes to determine whether the crown is made out of pure gold or not without breaking the crown, without melting it or something like that. And that is a very, very difficult task. And Archimedes worked and worked on it, but then he almost gave up. And at the moment when he gave up, in the last day, he had nothing to do and he took a bath. And he kind of floated in the bathtub. And he suddenly had an idea and he shouted, "Eureka!" And he knew the solution. The solution is actually you take a scale and you put a golden crown here, and you put pure gold on the right. And you put enough of the pure gold on the right so that the scale balances in air. But now you put the whole scale into water. And if the golden crown is not made out of pure gold, they will not balance inside water, even though they balance in air. And that is the method in which you can determine whether the golden crown is made of pure gold or not. So therefore, if you execute this method, if somebody give you 1 ounce of gold and claim this is made out of pure gold, you don't just wait, because the weight, we can all agree about 1 ounce. But whether it's 1 ounce of gold or not, you can actually execute this method by Archimedes, and you can determine whether this is actually 1 ounce of gold or not. So there's consensus about what we mean by 1 ounce of gold. But then later on, people become lazy. They start to use golden coin in the economy. And when the golden coin, 1 golden coin get passed around, after a little while, it becomes such a broad distribution. We don't agree exactly what is 1 golden coin. Why? Because people cheat. And they take 1 golden coin and they scrape a little bit on the edge, and they pass it to the next guy. And then they take another golden coin and they scrape a little bit on the edge and they pass it to the next guy. And after you do this enough times, you get 1 extra golden coin out of it. So then in this economy, there's confusion about what is meant by 1 golden coin. It can be 1 golden coin which has been chipped off a little bit, and 1 golden coin which has not been chipped off. And then the monetary economy runs into confusion. So you all know Isaac Newton was a great physicist. He wrote this great book of Principia, laid the foundation of the scientific understanding of the solar system. But then, after he became so famous, the Queen of England decided to give him a good job. Namely, he became the master of the Royal Mint. And he was faced with this problem that people cheat on the golden coin. And he, as the master of the Royal Mint, he has to define a precise standard, a very precise standard of what is meant by 1 golden coin. And he was the one who invented the method to introduce those stripes along the edge of the coin, so that when you try to chip it off or scrape it, you will immediately notice. And then suddenly 1 golden coin became very precisely understood that it is exactly 1 golden coin, not a golden coin that has been chipped off or not. So therefore, the lesson I propose that we have learned is that in order for the monetary economy to take place, you can actually take whatever money you need. It doesn't have to have any commodity value of its own. But the intrinsic measurement of the value of money, here in Switzerland, we're in the capitals of money. I don't know whether you discuss these questions or whether you exactly agree with me, but I would say the intrinsic value of money lies in its consensus, that we agree very precisely about what we mean by 1 unit of money. And that is very, very important. So now traditionally, except actually gold is a form of decentralized money, because it comes out of the physical world. It doesn't come from a subjective will. And gold is a very good example of money that is totally decentralized, except it's quite inconvenient to use in the modern digital economy. So the question, but now basically we have money that's printed by the central banks, which are centralized entities. So the question we would like to ask is whether in a decentralized world, we can reach consensus about something, okay? Without any central entity, but basically purely based on physical principles. So I'd like to give you an example. So if you take this bottle of water, it's made out of H2O. H2O has electrons in it, and every electron works like a magnetic compass. So look like the picture on the right. So every electron looks like a magnetic compass. It has a north pole and it has a south pole and can point to some direction. So every electron is like a little magnet, except this bottle of water is not magnetic. And the reason it is not magnetic is because these compasses, the electron spin, usually all point in random directions. So they don't agree. They don't reach consensus about the overall direction to point to. And that's why this bottle of water is most of the time not magnetic. But you do see magnetic phenomena, right? So when you go to your refrigerator, you stick a magnet, maybe with your family picture, on your refrigerator. So how does the magnet work there? And there somehow these electrons, each being a little magnetic compasses, have reached some kind of a consensus in a totally decentralized way to point along in some direction. And only because they all decide to point along the same direction, reaching the consensus about the direction they point to, the whole iron becomes magnetic. And that's why you can stick it onto a refrigerator. So that teaches us a deep lesson. It tells us that in the physical world, things can actually reach consensus in a totally decentralized way. The electrons don't have conscience, they don't obey orders, but somehow by communicating with each other, they somehow reach the decision. Everybody points in exactly the same direction. Okay? So the natural world, we see two kind of phenomena. One phenomena appears random and disordered, and one phenomena which seems to be ordered and not random. What is more, what kind of phenomena do you see more? Actually, we see more the kind of phenomena on the right and fewer phenomena on the left. So the ordered consensus phenomena is more rare. The disordered random phenomena are more common. And why is that? And the reason is that there are more ways to be random and disordered. There are only very few ways to be ordered. And if all things being equal, it's more likely to be disordered, and it's less likely to be ordered. So I am a professor of physics. I teach a class called statistical physics. And on the opening day, when I walk into my class, I cite Leo Tolstoy about Anna Karenina. Any one of you have read this great book, Anna Karenina? Maybe you raise your hand. So do you remember what's the opening line of that book? So it says, all happy families are the same. Unhappy families are unhappy in their own ways. Because there are many, many ways to be unhappy. There are very few ways to be happy. So that's why most of the time people are unhappy. So actually, this is the phenomena. So because if they're random, there's so many combinations to point in the random direction. Each random configuration is very unique, but they all appear random to us. But there are only very few configurations in which they all decide to point in the same direction, where they appear to be ordered. So the natural world naturally tends to be disordered. So we actually call this the most fundamental law. Actually, Albert Einstein, he discovered so many laws, but he says this may be the most fundamental law of nature, that natural world in a closed system, natural evolution leads to a totally disordered state. And this is called the second law of thermodynamics. But yet we see in our surrounding the phenomena of life, which is more ordered. So how can that be? And the only way it can be is that for a subsystem to be more ordered, but for the overall system still to be more disordered. So it is actually possible to make a subsystem to be more ordered, like we see here, and we make the environment more disordered. So this phenomena of order versus disorder, consensus versus non-consensus is actually key to the natural world. So that's why I want us to think very, very deeply about whenever we use these words, medium of exchange, consensus, and so on, that they all have analogs in the natural world. And the analog we see in the natural world is that most of the time people don't agree, but very few cases people agree. And it's a very special state to reach consensus where people agree. And the only way you can do that is to pay a cost to make the other part of the world more disordered. And that will bring us to the Bitcoin consensus when we think about. So I explained that the natural world, you don't need a central bank to tell all the electrons which direction to point to. Somehow, by pumping entropy outside and reducing the entropy of itself, the electronic world can reach consensus and become magnetic. And the same similar phenomena happen in the biological world. So in the deep sea, you have these bacteria, which in principle can light up. But if there's not enough bacteria around them to light up, they can still not see enough. So they also have to reach consensus when all of them decide to light up. And they do that by communicating with other bacteria, by sending a little bit receptors to the surrounding. And if everyone sends out some receptors, and if the bacteria also receive these receptors, if you count enough receptors they receive, they know there's enough bacteria around, and then suddenly they all decide to light up. And this is called bacteria fissurae, and they have this kind of collective phenomena where they reach consensus. So now that brings me to the world of distributed computing. So in the world of distributed computing, people have been asking this question, how they can reach consensus among these distributed computers without in a distributed world. So people actually thought about this question, and the first idea they have is that whether there can be some kind of a central command master deterministic algorithm so that every computer on the network try to execute this algorithm, which is deterministic, and somehow this algorithm tell them how to reach consensus. And they worked and worked and worked, and they couldn't reach, they couldn't find such deterministic algorithm. And finally, this happens a lot in science. People try to look for something, and they try and find they cannot do it, and finally somebody prove that this is not possible. So there's a very profoundly deep theory in computer science called the Fisher-Lynch-Patterson theorem. It tells you that there doesn't exist a master deterministic algorithm in a distributed computing world which can tell them how to reach consensus. Okay? So that is analogous to the physical world of second law of thermodynamics. The statement of second law of thermodynamics is very similar. Here, I think actually here in Switzerland, people try to build perpetual mobile, that machines that can, after they build a Swiss watch, they start to think whether we can build a Swiss watch that runs forever. And of course, later people prove that it is not possible. And it's not possible partly because of this second law of thermodynamics. So we know this is centralized kind of a master deterministic algorithm which does not create entropy, cannot reach consensus which reduces entropy. So I said that entropy is basically disorder. So the only way you can reach consensus is somehow pay a cost in making the rest of the world more disordered. Okay? So after people try this enough times, and after proving this theorem, people start to think that we have to somehow introduce randomness into the system. And by reaching consensus to become more ordered, you have to pay a price or cost in making the environment more disordered. And that is the profound idea of proof of work, first adopted in the Bitcoin blockchain world. So the idea is that we all need to reach consensus about transactions. And actually, the consensus we want to reach, actually with the simple cryptographic protocols, we can agree on which pseudo anonymous address sent how much transactions to some other address. The consensus we need to reach about is a temporal order of the transactions. So if we have a decentralized way to keep a ledger, I'm making some transaction with you, you're making some transaction with him, and so on and so forth, we need to find a way for all of us to agree which temporal order in which the transaction happened. So I think here in Switzerland, near Switzerland, we constantly think about these time questions. Actually, time is most important for financial transactions because without an agreement on time, we can double spend some money. So I can, if I only have 10 Bitcoin left, I can give you 8 Bitcoin here, and this information hasn't been widely propagated along the network, and then I can go to Africa, and I can spend another 10 Bitcoin because they didn't record the transaction that I already spent the Bitcoin here. So if we want to have a distributed ledger system, the most important thing is to agree on a global temporal order of all transactions so that we can collect into a common book of ledger and all transactions become temporally ordered. And that is an ordering phenomena that has to come with some kind of a cost. And the brilliant solution by Satoshi Nakamoto, actually, I saw this, there's a quote on the blackboard. It says something like, there's nothing more important of a right idea at the right time. But actually, you don't even need to invent the right idea yourself. The idea of proof of work was already around. Satoshi Nakamoto just put different things together, and he borrowed the idea of proof of work. So by doing proof of work, it says that all of us can compete in adding the next block with our own list of the temporal order of the transaction, but we have to compete who has the right to add the next block into the blockchain, and we compete by trying to solve a hash puzzle. But the hash puzzle can only be solved, it appears to be a random puzzle, so that we have to burn some electricity in solving the puzzle, but it has the property that is very difficult to solve, but very easy to verify. So if someone of you have solved this puzzle, all of us can check whether the solution is correct, and if it's correct, you will then have the right to add your block into the blockchain, and your block has the temporal order of the transactions. So this is a way to agree to reach a global agreement on consensus on the temporal order of transaction, but at a cost that you have to burn electricity, and that makes the rest of the world more random. So that agrees perfectly with my fundamental idea that in order to reach consensus, you only reach a consensus about a subsystem, a system of financial transactions, but the overall system of the world has become more disordered because you burnt electricity in computing the hash puzzle. So I think that but the blockchain idea is certainly it's a kind of a decentralized protocol. It's based on, it's still compatible with this basic idea that overall entropy has to increase, but you're dumping some entropy somewhere else, and you make our financial world more ordered by reaching consensus, but the financial transactions is all about consensus. The intrinsic value lies in consensus itself. So this tells us that finally we're welcoming into a new era of decentralization. And when you look at the history of the world, the history of the empires, it also oscillates between centralization and decentralization. Here in Switzerland and Liechtenstein, looked a little bit into the history of Liechtenstein. It comes from a very decentralized empire called the Holy Roman Empire. So the history of the world oscillates between centralization and decentralization, and so is the history of the networking world. When I first came from China and Germany to United States in the 80s, the world looks totally centralized in networking by AT&T. It looks like the monolithic monopoly that will last for another 1,000 years. The technology that made this possible is called circuit switching. So under the circuit switching technology, the most natural, efficient way to do things is a centralized monopoly. And AT&T emerged as a result of that and seems to be lasting forever. But the moment a decentralized protocol gets introduced, such as the TCP/IP-based packet switching, overnight, the monopoly of AT&T is broken. Suddenly, the world became decentralized. It went through some chaotic evolution, but then suddenly, internet became the dominant way of doing things. But then, the content, even though the networking became decentralized, but then the content also gets decentralized and very spread over the internet, and everyone can generate some content. And that became very difficult, and very difficult for people to find content. And then centralized monopoly appear again, such as Google and Facebook. They do nothing but reorganizing information. Actually, they do nothing but reorganizing our private information. And that is the point that I would like to come back to later. But then the blockchain technology leads to a new wave of decentralization. If internet is the decentralized exchange of information or communication, blockchain is a decentralized way to exchange value. And that can be much bigger than the internet itself. So in the blockchain world, how is this trust built? It is actually built fundamentally on math. For example, the hash puzzle that we need to solve. So let me talk more philosophically about evolution of human trust. So we actually develop a lot of protocols of exchange so that we can work in synchrony, that we can cooperate together to do something that only we can achieve collectively. Language is one such thing, and law is another such thing. But finally, after the invention of the blockchain, I believe we'll reach a new world that we can build our trust based on mathematics. And that may be the last evolution of the human society, maybe the highest point that we can possibly reach. Why? Because when you look at, here we have universities, and when you go to university, there's so many subjects that you can choose to study. But I'd like to ask you the question, among all branches of human knowledge, which branch of human knowledge we have most consensus about? Right? When you study social science, like political science, I think people really agree. When you study diplomacy, people really agree. Then people agree a little bit more on natural sciences, on biology, still not so much consensus, and then maybe on chemistry, more consensus. But then on physics, wow, we have more consensus. But maybe one branch where humanity has, one branch of knowledge where humanity has the most consensus about is mathematics. But I just argued the value of money lies in its consensus, and mathematics is the branch of human knowledge we'll have most consensus about. So then we can embrace the bright new future world of in math we trust. And when you actually look at the fundamental, so for example, why mathematics we can trust more, for example, on the left, you see these 5 beautiful Platonic solids. But when you make any one of them physically, you cannot, even with the Swiss technology, we cannot make a perfect cube. We cannot make a perfect octahedron, right? Which is perfectly symmetrical. These solids are beautiful because they're perfectly symmetrical. But the mathematical solids of a cube, of an octahedron, they are perfectly symmetrical, right? And when you look at the fundamental laws of nature at its deepest level, a lot of them, again, here discovered very near here in CERN, Geneva, we actually find at the deepest level of the natural world, it's governed by very, very precise and beautiful mathematical laws. So why shouldn't we build a financial system based on math? And that is the bright new world of blockchain. So what kind of math? So we have the math of public and private key based on elliptic curves. So this is one remarkable thing, right? Elliptic curve used to be one of the most abstract branch of mathematics and also number theory. And a lot of mathematicians, they pride themselves to be so abstract that they think what they discover can never be used in real practical application. But suddenly, they are disappointed. The beautiful math they discover, for example, in number theory, suddenly becomes so useful in. But why are they useful? Because they help us to build a trust. So the Bitcoin protocol of proof of work is based on the hash function, and it's again a very interesting kind of mathematical function, the hash function. And then there is so I will talk about the world that how we build trust. Let me give you a very, very simple example. It reminds me a little bit of the story of Archimedes. So let's say we want a natural economic transaction to occur. What is the natural economic transaction? Let's say you are very rich and you have the gold and you have the diamond, but you are not good with your hand. You don't know how to fashion a diamond ring out of raw gold and raw diamond. But I'm very good with my hand. I can easily fashion a diamond ring out of it. But when you give the gold and diamond to me, there's a trust issue, because then overnight I can steal some gold, I'm mixing some lead, and I return a golden ring to you, which is not made out of pure gold. So there's a trust issue, and a natural economic transaction which otherwise should occur by me working for you will not occur because of the trust. So how do we deal with this problem? We can deal with this problem by making a glove box. So what's a glove box? So we can just make a transparent, let's say a plastic transparent box. You put your gold and you put your diamond inside the box. You lock it with a lock, and you keep your private key. But you build 2 holes with gloves. So then I, as a handyman, can come in with the gloves. I can work on these diamond and gold to make a diamond ring, but there's nothing I can take out of it. Okay, so this is the physical implementation, that I can work on your diamond and on your gold through my glove and by seeing it, but there's nothing I can take out. And then I can work on it, and then finally you see the diamond ring has been fashioned, you unlock it, everything, whatever is left over belongs to you, and you just pay me and we're done with it. But, so this is only an analogy story. So what is happening here is that the greatest resources and the greatest mind is your data. But I'm a good mathematician. I can analyze the data and I can learn some wisdom out of it. But there's a mistrust. You don't trust to give the data to me because I can resell it in the black market. So what we need is something similar to this glove box, so that your data is kept safe inside the glove box. I can come in with my hand, I can work on your data, but the only thing I can take out of it is some collective statistical information which doesn't violate any of your privacy. So these days, Europe is totally paranoid, and they introduce these harsh draconian laws as GDPR. But then it makes economic transaction very, very difficult. So what we need is this kind of math, plus the blockchain, so that we can actually work on your encrypted data, and we can still extract some statistical learning out of it. And this kind of math goes under the name of zero-knowledge proof, secure multi-party computation, and homomorphic encryption. And that, so I think the most promising application of the blockchain world is enabling of a data marketplace. But only a data marketplace can be enabled if I can work on your data, which is privacy protected, and I can do computation, which is privacy preserving, and I can finally learn some statistical information, which doesn't violate your individual privacy. It's mind-boggling that these kind of mathematics exist that makes it possible. So that's, again, an example of in math we trust. Also, these days, we see a lot of smart contracts. How do we really know the smart contracts does? Because it may be a very complicated program. That's what the white paper says. So then there's a mathematics called formal verification, come out of mathematics of logic, and that can check. For example, we invested in a company which does that. And finally, the blockchain is pretty slow. In order to make it fast, there's an idea to use DAG, directed acyclic graph, to make it happen. So just as I explained, it's one of the most promising application of blockchain. We know, actually, I gave the title of this talk in Math We Trust, but you can search my name on YouTube. A few months ago, I gave a talk to all Googles all around the world. It's about quantum computing, AI, and blockchain. And I see a very bright future of combining AI with blockchain. Why is that? So what does AI need? AI needs three things. One is very fast computers, and second is very good smart algorithms, such as deep learning. But maybe the most important thing is data for AI to learn. So for example, computer vision was very poor before the ImageNet. And after this large data set of ImageNet became possible, suddenly computer vision became very, very good. So, but there's a lot of area AI could learn, but it doesn't have the data. But it can only have enough data if this privacy problem is solved. And the privacy problem can be solved with this kind of mathematical encryption technology. So after thinking, after investing in the blockchain world for a little bit, and after thinking quite a bit about this whole economy, data economy, I decided to found my own company. So not only I'm investing in the blockchain world, I also founded my own company. So the name of the company is called Novo Vivo, A New Life. And it's trying to create a data marketplace for all health data. So the idea is that you should own all your data. Not any, the hospitals can have your data, but in the end of the day, every individual should have the right to own all your data. And that includes your genomic data, because it's part of your genome. You should be able to own it. You should own all your IoT data, all the device that tracks your health behavior. But also, you should own all your electronic medical records, right? So all your electronic medical records you should own. But this is very sensitive and very private. But if we have this data, and if we can learn from the data of everyone, then biomedical will become very advanced. Right now, we have the Moore's law for the digital world. In the digital world, after 18 months, everything becomes twice more efficient. But in the drug development world, the cost to develop roughly the same drug doubles every 5 years. It's the opposite of the Moore's law. But if we can learn, if we let the computer and AI to learn from all our genomic data and all health data, the computer AI can actually develop drug just based on AI. And that will make the world so much more efficient. But the problem is that we're dealing with very, very sensitive data. So I want to use blockchain to get the ownership right. You will have a private key, you will have a public key. With your private key, you encrypt all your data. And with your public key, you have a wallet that whoever does privacy-preserving computation on your data will give you a reward onto your public wallet address. But then on top of it, we have all this math of doing privacy-preserving computation, such as zero-knowledge proof and homomorphic encryption. Then the drug development company can come in, and they can compute on your private encrypted data without violating your privacy, but learn some collective behavior, such as diabetes is caused by this and that gene on which and what chromosomes. And then suddenly drug development becomes so efficient. So that's what leads to a quantum jump of AI for drug discovery, just like ImageNet led a quantum jump in the accuracy of computer vision. And this is what I want to do. And with this, I think the world will become much better because individuals get rewarded by contributing data. Their privacy is not totally preserved. And then the drug development costs will go down, maybe after every 5 years, not double after every 5 years. So now this world also it's very, very interesting that it can do social good. It can correct a lot of biases. What is the problem we have in today's world? One major problem we have in today's world is that we have biases. Biases against whom? Biases against minorities. Usually biases are from a majority against a minority. And that is the social problem we have. But in such a world of data marketplace, let's think about what kind of data is most useful. Let's say I have developed a machine learning algorithm, and that is already, let's say, 90% accurate. So what kind of new data can help me to go from 90% accurate to 99% accurate? If I get yet another data point, which is very similar to what I have had before, that data has almost no value. But if I get a data which is very different from those I have learned previously, then it suddenly can help me to increase the accuracy of my AI algorithm. So in such a world, the minority data gets much higher priced. And that can help to correct the social good. So I call this world in which the ugly duckling becomes the beautiful swan. You remember the story, right? The ugly duckling is not ugly, but different. And we're biased against the difference we have. But in such a world, it will be amplified and be rewarded to be different. So then there's also AI, which can help the surveillance of the blockchain, which I will talk less about. But let me briefly introduce you my fund. So it's quite remarkable that in Stanford and in Silicon Valley, you can be both a professor and an investor. I'm a professor at Stanford University, but I also have a fund. So we introduced this fund called DHCV, and now branded as Digital Horizon VC. And the logo has a triangle, and triangle means that investment, which is on the tip, should be based on education and research, the two bases of the triangle. And it builds this cross, trying to build a relationship between academia and investment, and hopefully between US and the rest of the world. And what are the projects that we're excited about? We think blockchain requires good scaling solutions. So for example, DAC is one good example. We also believe that a lot of the network resources should be tokenized. The network will work much more efficiently if we all provide our resources to help each other. But in the previous era, all contribution can vary. You can just make contribution based on altruistic goals, but it will be much better and much more efficient if people can get rewarded by providing network resources. So for example, content delivery network is one such example. If people help to contribute to the content delivery network, they should be rewarded. And we're actually investing in a project called Theta, which is leading in this field. We also believe that, so that's my new company, Novo Vivo, Privacy Preserving Genomics Healthcare Data Marketplace. Blockchain is also good in collecting silos, right? Yeah, so if I have a very centralized world, blockchain doesn't have that much use. But let's imagine in the healthcare system, right? We have IoT devices, we have genomics, we have so many different hospitals, especially in the US. Nobody talks to anybody at the hospitals. But with the blockchain world, we can finally unify them into one. So this, I think, will be very exciting. I think stable token is also very important. And stable against what? So we recently invested in a company that pegs the value of the token to the electricity cost. And whatever the electricity cost is, it's not pegged to any fiat currencies of the world, but just pegged to the electric power, the cost to generate the electric power. And then also maybe the tokenization of the sharing economy. So now I'm coming to the last slide of my talk. So you know, I'm a physicist. I apply admire Newton. And Newton's work, Principia, is actually called the mathematical principle of natural philosophy. So when you really look at the human world, we made the greatest advance in the age of enlightenment by having a mathematical understanding, a mathematical principle of the natural world. But finally now, I believe we're into an unbelievable revolution that mathematics can help to direct a human societal world in making our financial system, in building the trust of our financial system, and make our economy so much more efficient. And that is the vision for the blockchain. Thank you very much.
So now I'd like to welcome Effie on stage. We are getting the table aside.
Hello, everyone. I have the pleasure of moderating and being in company with two amazing entrepreneurs, two amazing people. And I just want to let you know that Professor Zhang studied in Germany, where Monty comes from, and he was previously a VC entrepreneur. And we have Professor who studied in Berlin, right? And is now running a VC from the US. That's one connection. And I also want to make the connection with Greece, where I come from, since I see that the professor is a big fan of Plato and his principle, which is that mathematical principles do describe the world, that everywhere in the universe, they're not just a representation. So that's what I heard from you. And as we say, all we Anglophones, when we don't understand something, what do we say? That's Greek to me. And we, the Greeks, say that's Chinese to me. So there's another link. I'd like to start also, and I'm not babbling, I think it's worth to note that Professor Zhang in China is more than honored as, I would say more like we would honor an Olympic, our first Olympic gold medal ever, or somebody who not only got the first gold Olympic medal, but continued thereafter. And in China, from what I understand, he's recognized as one of those scientists that made the Western scientific world turn their heads and recognize that China is a country that where amazing scientists are born. This goes with the stereotypes that we Westerners unfortunately have. So I'll stop talking here, and I'm going to ask Professor Zhang a favor. Yes. Can you say in Chinese, I admire, no, rather, yeah, say how I could say in Chinese, I admire Professor Zhang.
I would rather
try
say,
to repeat.
in Chinese, I admire Plato.
No,
So-
I'll teach you in Greek. I'll teach you in Greek.
Oh,
so
yeah.
let me start. I'll teach you in Greek. I admire Plato. You say θαυμάζω
Samazo,
τον
Don,
Πλάτωνα.
Platona.
Very good. Okay, so now you teach me in Chinese. I admire Dr. Zhang.
我敬仰张教授。
Slow down. I was kind to you.
我
我
I yeah 敬仰
敬仰
admire 张教授。
Zhang
张教授 Professor
Zhang
Zhang.
Jiaoshu.
Yeah.
You try that, Monty? None of that. Neither the Greek nor the Chinese. Okay, so let's dive into our topic. Tell us how you got infected from the bug of blockchain. When was the first sort of moment of your aha sort of moment?
Yeah, so I think this was, I think 2014 when I read I was on vacation in Cabo in Mexico with my family and read for the first time the paper by Satoshi. And that it's such a simple and universal idea. It really, the kind of the emotion I got of it is like almost reading Einstein's paper on special theory of relativity, a new way of looking at the world, a new way of organizing the world, but yet it's so simple and so universal that I was totally fascinated by it.
Right. And then what was sort of the next, I would say, milestone? Was it in the direction of research or investing? How did you go about it to get your hands sort of dirty?
Around the same time, so this happened initially as two independent events. I live on Stanford campus. I did some angel investment, and I invested into my neighbors, and one of them happened to be the founder of VMware. And VMware is the technology behind all cloud computing, and it was a very good investment. So then I started to think about doing it systematically, and we organized a fund, DHCV. So it happened like an independent event that happened also around 2014. But then around that time, I just read Satoshi's paper, and I told my team, you guys should have your own independent mind. What's a good area to invest? I'm totally determined that blockchain is the best place to invest.
Okay, so really it was being in Stanford, being close to Silicon Valley, being in that atmosphere.
Yeah, but also happened to read the blockchain paper.
Okay, okay. And what about China? When did you sort of cross over and go back to China?
So
I'm
originally from China. In 1980, I went to Germany to study in Berlin for 3 years, and then I came to US for doing a PhD, and then I became a professor at Stanford, which is on the Pacific side. So I always try to build a bridge between these two countries, and so I have quite close relationship. I visit Europe about the same number of times in a year. I visit Europe 6 times a year. I visit China 6 times a year. A lot of times I go around the world, just like in these trips.
Great. And in your portfolio companies, is it a global portfolio or very?
It is a global portfolio. Theta, just in terms of the blockchain investment, Theta is a US-based company. CNN actually is a Chinese company doing business in India, which is also a pretty good token investment. And then Ontology, which tries to build a public chain for data marketplace, comes out of China.
Great, great. Can I ask you, Monty, a bit about how you met the professor and the link to LCX, and then we'll go back?
So I had been traveling the technology hubs of the world, and I think it's super important to be close to the innovators. And I have to agree with you, a lot of innovators are coming out of Stanford campus, Palo Alto Avenue, University Avenue there. So a lot of smart minds are attracted to go there. Like it's like a magnet. But there are also other places which work like that. There's Tel Aviv, Israel. There's Beijing, which is fascinating what's happening over there, and maybe some other places. And so I've been being on a kind of a global roadshow as well. Just came from Asia, and then I had been at the Stanford University, and somebody invited me to an event at the Computer History Museum. So there's the museum, and you can see all the computers from the past and some also prototypes of the future. And there happened to be this event, and then like a common friend introduced us, and Professor Zhang had been speaking about In Mass We Trust. So that was our first initial meeting, and I'm telling the story about these technology hubs because it's essential to be, if you want to be ahead of time and really develop something new, to learn from the best people globally, and that's what we are trying to bring now together with LCX in Liechtenstein in a way, to go really on a global approach and get kind of the smartest people involved. And it's also exciting here in Liechtenstein and Europe actually, because some of the people I met, I've been speaking with them. There's an exciting team in Palo Alto of a company called Zappo, XAPO, for example. But they're technically a Swiss company. They're headquartered in Zug. Then I flew over to Tel Aviv and been in Crypto Tower there, and I met Eyal Herzog, the founder of Bancor. And he told me, yeah, we just set up shop in Zug as well, Crypto Valley. So a lot of these companies are internationally based, but coming now here to Europe, it's the first time in a history of like 20 years of my digital experience here where I've seen that happen, that people in Stanford turn around and said, oh, we can't do it here, where should we go? And now a lot of these things which Crypto Valley and Zug has imagined is now actually set into practice in Liechtenstein with the blockchain laws and the friendly environment here. So that's why we chose to be here.
Great. Obviously, you are focused on the token sharing economy, as you mentioned, and what we all expect, the next wave of being able to tokenize all sorts of values. I really wanted to ask you if you could tell us a little bit more about this symbiosis between blockchain and AI and how that could unlock value, especially in emerging markets or in the classes of people that are excluded, not only financially, from education, in general, from all sorts of resources. How do you see that, and are we too far away? And at the end, can banks imagine being the places where we trust other assets, you know, beyond what we typically think, which is our salary, our, you know, those types of medium of exchanges? Can you share your insights?
Yeah, so in terms of the symbiosis between AI and blockchain, I already tried to explain what AI needs the most is the data, and the blockchain can basically organize data in terms of the ownership of the data with the private key, public key, with the private key encrypting the data, but still AI being able to learn from encrypted data, but giving rewards to the public address. So I think that will be a very, very big thing, because in the end of the day, AI is really, so we saw there was a lot of hype about AI, but suddenly it kind of plateaued. And I think the reason it plateaued is because the availability of data. And with the blockchain, suddenly the data can become more available with the right incentive mechanism. And that will take the AI to the next stage. But also we see that the blockchain world requires some kind of regulation, some oversight, some compliance, but it becomes such a digital world all along the globe, it became very difficult for some national government to do the compliance over the blockchain world. So I think AI can also play a role like that, to watch over the compliance issues, it can check all the transactions. A lot of them are open on the chain, and maybe find kind of ill-conceived behaviors to make the blockchain world better. And in that sense, it's a kind of a symbiosis, one helping the other.
So am I correct in imagining that we have, instead of compliance officers and regulators,
AI-based compliance.
AI agents that are working to...
And one technique I already mentioned is called formal verification.
What is that? Because I've heard of it.
Yeah, so this is actually based, again, on of very abstract mathematics research of logic. But then so some of the smart contract can be translated into functional programming language, and they can be checked whether they are doing what they're supposed to do.
So it's as if we had a God
that certifies software. So I think the smart contracts are so sensitive about financial transactions. We thought the Ethereum fork was just due to a mistake in the programming of the smart contract. And this kind of mistake can be very early on detected by formal verification.
Okay.
So in the future, so the company we invested is called CERTIC. I can imagine in the future, just like every computer says Intel Inside, a smart contract can say certified by CERTIC or something like that.
Great, great. I think it would be interesting to hear from the audience. If you have any questions, let's start with people. How many people are here from the financial industry? Raise your hand. Okay. And how many are already in the blockchain world somehow working and, okay. Okay, so let's start with the minority, which is the people from the financial industry. What would you like to ask the professor or Monty? And can I give you the floor?
I have a question that is related to artificial intelligence and humanity trust. I foresee a future where, of course, the computer is going to outpass the humanity in thinking and fast speed and so on. So the finance world is based on a zero-sum game. So how do you see in a future where everything is going to be run by bots, and so the exchange is probably going to have a lot of users with their own bots? So how's it going to be that? Do you see like there will be people actually losing or winning, or how do you foresee that future?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that the future AI will play a more kind of important role. But I think maybe also with the blockchain, that AI, a lot of the actions AI can take, maybe it's also hashed onto the blockchain, anchored on the blockchain, that it also leaves kind of an auditable trail that we can actually also monitor what AI agents are actually doing by leaving an immutable kind of record of what they did. Whether I think it's inevitable that AI will play a more and more kind of important role.
Anybody else?
Can you say a name?
Helmut Flieger. On one slide you showed the acrylic graph, which is, I think, in connection with the tangle, and you always mentioned the blockchain, which is, for my understanding, a bit different thing. So where do you see more or the brighter future of the both?
Yeah. So I think people keep on finding the right word for it. Sometimes we refer to blockchain, then we refer to crypto, but also the fundamental data structure may not be a chain, but rather a tree, a DAG. So I think We need maybe a better word to describe this future. But I hope everything still fits into my slogan of in math we trust.
Professor, in math we trust, as I hear it, is something that raises a question in my head, whether there's some type of synchronicity from a philosophical and social point of view that we've come to the realization now. There's more consensus, as you like to say, about that right now. Do you feel that there's some type of synchronicity in either because we have a lot of problems, because there's complexity, because we really can't reach consensus, because we're going to be 9 trillion? I don't know. Do you feel that?
Yeah, so I feel, for example, when you look at human evolution, language was the most important thing. I think there's a lot of evidence. Language is the only ability that distinguished us from Neanderthals or predecessors. So, but language, human language, natural language is still not precise. And when you use imprecise language, it can lead to less consensus. So I really think the future of the financial world is all about trust and about consensus, and to build the future of the financial world on this kind of math is the most natural thing.
Okay.
Math is the greatest thing. It's the most precise language. But it's not only just a language, but it can do this incredible thing. I don't know how many of you know about the math I talk about. It's really absolutely incredible that you can do zero knowledge proof, you can do homomorphic encryption, and these will enable these are the fundamental building blocks of the data economy. That I think Europe is also coming to a very important moment. They realize the importance of privacy, but they only try to solve the problem by human law, like GDPR, without realizing it can be solved by technology and math. That is one thing Europe has to learn.
How would you see that solution?
How
would you see that solution?
Yeah, so this kind of math can preserve privacy, but still learn, because if you one thing to do privacy is just lock up all data and nobody can see anything, but then it doesn't lead to statistical learning. So we want to do kind of in a way that you only reveal one bit of information at a time, and not your own private information.
And I have another question to you. If you speak to decision makers, leaders in the world, you're advising a couple of government people as well. How do you explain them that it is relevant that they not only think about it but do something?
Yeah. So I think the difficult thing is today when you look at the world of human knowledge. So I liken the human knowledge as a tree, right? And it's really growing and flourishing. But it has a side effect that one branch is totally disconnected. As the tree is growing, the branches, the tip of the branches are farther and farther apart from each other. So today we have legislators, we have lawmakers, we have politicians, and they have studied political science. They have no idea about this kind of math. And mathematicians are doing prime number theory and so on. They didn't realize the math they developed can be used to solve a societal problem. So that's how I find my role. So I'm kind of, I find my mission in life to be more like Benjamin Franklin or Leonardo da Vinci, that someone who can connect different branches of human knowledge and tell humanity that there are solutions already out there, only if you can make the connection. But it's very hard because if you're a political scientist, you mistrust math. Rather than in math you trust. So
you are trying to.
So I hope to become a spokesperson for the interconnected knowledge of the world, and it's only through this connection the major problems of the world can be solved.
So building bridges.
But the nature of our educational system It is already so hard for me to read all the texts of political science during it, and you have 4 years in college, in university, and the way our education system is built, it's very hard for someone to learn that the new technology. So I think also, but I think the very important thing is that for those technology people to speak maybe in a language that is easier for the policymakers to understand, but for policymakers also to have a little bit of a humble heart to know that some of the problems they try to solve by legislation can actually be solved by technology.
I wanted to ask the panel about the Blockchain Act. Now, I've seen the untranslated German version, and my German is non-existent. But it looks like legislators here are really engaging with some of the deep problems about security tokens, utility tokens, tokens, really what crypto means for the economy. I was curious, Monty, as an entrepreneur and venture capitalist in your past life, what brought you to Liechtenstein? Was it kind of the Blockchain Act and kind of the conversation around that? And then to the professor, how do you view a country like Liechtenstein, which is embracing crypto assets as an asset class in the global kind of investment landscape?
So we had been looking on a global level. I'd been building companies in China, in the US before, so I didn't have a problem to move anywhere, basically, to make that a success. And as a lot of attention had been going into Europe in the past, we had been especially looking into different jurisdictions. But Liechtenstein stands out in terms of a couple of things. One is actually the government support, the willingness to really dive into that. And I've never seen that in other places with the working group that had been studying it for not only a few weeks and then come up with a solution, but rather for almost 2 years now. So the approach Liechtenstein is taking on the Blockchain Act is a very holistic approach, creating or thinking about a token economy and regulating each part of it, or not coming up with like new solutions, but rather categorize it and say this part is already belonging to different financial regulatory structures and other pieces. So basically it gives the whole blockchain and cryptocurrency industry a clear structure, transparency, reliability, and I see that Liechtenstein could be really a role model on that world. And especially with the security tokens. So as securities or like any financial assets could be tokenized, they could be traded globally, global markets could be developed, payments, tokens, stable coins could enable financial trade within milliseconds on a global space. So I really see that there's the opportunity to kind of do something which is even bigger than NASDAQ, which could be coming out of Liechtenstein.
Yeah, so I think because blockchain, as I said, leads to the next decentralization wave, I think the big governments of the world will always be slow in adopting and embracing this new technology. So it really gives an opportunity to a country like Liechtenstein to be the first one. Even though I read German, I somehow never got a text, so I look forward to studying it. Yeah, so I think this it really leads to some suspicion about whether proof of stake can really work. Because the thing about the proof of work is that it's physical, that it's objective. And proof of stake because the humans are involved, and you can always be susceptible for bribery, that maybe I lose more stake on chain, but I gain more off chain. So I think that is the kind of because the humans are involved, there's an arbitrage opportunity to maybe lose something on chain but gain something off chain. So when you really think about it, it gets very complicated. I think in some sense it deviates from the original vision. So that's why my argument is so powerful, that you have to realize that there has to be a cost somewhere. So there's a physics construct of some kind of a centralized entity that can do the regulation. We have a name for it. It's called a Maxwell's demon. And basically, the proof is that such entity cannot exist.
Professor, you have a global view of where, in which areas we can hope and expect that we might have this transformation? Can it be finance? Can it be healthcare?
Yeah.
Can it be supply chain?
Yeah.
Can it be commerce, education? There's so many areas we can imagine. Some people say it's going to be where there's more intermediaries, more inefficiencies. I'm not sure if that's the case. Do you
I think finance is certainly the area blockchain will have maybe, if you think about low-hanging fruit, I think finance will certainly be. But I think well, right now I'm passionate about health.
Okay.
And health records using blockchain to break the silos.
So do you see that there's going to be, it's going to be easier to be adopted by the finance sector for all sorts of reasons?
But I think this is maybe why the Blockchain Act is so important. There has to be clear laws governing the security tokens. And so maybe one can view Liechtenstein as an experiment. So talking about China, actually the way China developed was very, very smart. So there's this great leader, Deng Xiaoping, and he wants to introduce more market mechanism into a communist rule. And he picked a special area he called Special Economic Zone. And one of them is Shoucheng, next to Hong Kong. And that is now one of the most successful and flourishing cities. So I think also similarly in the blockchain world, we need some place to conduct the trial and the experiment.
And convince the rest of the world.
That this is possible. And if that becomes successful, Liechtenstein can really become the center of the world.
And maybe, yeah. But I want to point out, I think healthcare is a very good example to showcase the power of blockchain.
But also something that really does social good.
Yeah.
Because when you really look at, but it's also directly related to finance. We have a social contract, namely the Medicare insurance system. You work hard, and when you get old, the younger generation will take care of you. Yeah. Except it's not working. When you really project the costs, it's really for sure the Medicare system will become insolvent around 2030. And it's one of the greatest social problems facing all advanced nations of the world. So my vision, Rousseau has this vision for social contract. We in blockchain world, we have this vision for smart contract. I call my vision to be a smart social contract.
And when I got asked, how can you explain the blockchain and the power of it, you talked about the decentralization of computers, that everybody has like one piece of the puzzle and can actually prove everybody consents. And so a good way to explain it is actually that we have introduced you here today. And so if Professor Zhang would leave the room, and then there's somebody else coming, and I say, like, here you are back again, Professor Zhang. But everybody else in the room would say, oh, no, I don't think he is really Professor Zhang. So even if I could pay a couple of you people to also prove he is Professor Zhang, majority of the people would say it's not possible. And that's kind of the key of the hash power and the mining facilities of the blockchain, that having the consensus of the majority, even if somebody would try to hack it or steal the information, like in this example, it would still be kind of the common consensus. And that's kind of the power of it. And it's similar to healthcare, or like any data. Basically, if you're a teenager or a young student and you want to go to the club the first time, so the doorman says, how old are you? And he's like, 21, so can enter in the US in a club. And then it says, okay, can you show me your passport? You give them the passport, and there are all these information on there, like street name, full name, and then also the age. But actually, on the blockchain, it would be possible that he has a request saying, how are you? Actually, it's not how old are you, it's only, are you old enough? And then the blockchain could give back an information saying yes or no. And that's similar to healthcare, because there are all these sensible information. You don't want to share all the information with this doctor, but you just want to give him the answers he needs now, and the rest put to the side. So, for example, for insurance companies, they just need to know if you're like proven or if they can get you, but they actually don't need to know every detail. It would be just enough if there's a validator.
So this is the zero knowledge proof. You only give out a very select piece of information.
Yes.
Professor,
so maybe let me explain. So for you, all of you maybe know the game of Sudoku. So it's a very, very difficult game to solve. So I want to convince you that I have solved the game. Now, easiest way to convince you is to show you the solution, and you can check indeed it's a solution. But I want to convince you that I have solved the puzzle without revealing to you the solution. I only want to reveal you one bit of information, that I have solved the game. But if I reveal you the solution, I give you too much information. I reveal you the actual solution. And mathematically, it's possible to convince you that I have solved it without revealing you the solution. That's called zero knowledge proof.
Sure question.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of hype around zero knowledge proofs in the last 6 to 9 months.
Yeah.
I know personally 3 or 4 research teams in the United States that are basically working on this.
Yeah.
To be honest, I've not seen a single scalable, computational, efficient, practical implementation of it yet.
Well, Zcash is.
Well, Zcash is, but it's not usable by any other data standards. Right? So
No, but Zcash is a proof that zero knowledge proof.
I'm not doubting that it can exist. I'm just
No, zero knowledge, Zcash is being used.
You know, but when can other people with other data applications, like yourself, with
So we're building such a system.
when can we see these systems emerge?
So it will take, in my system, because it's more complex, but fundamentally, Zcash uses what is called ZK stock, and it works beautifully so far. But it has its own problem. It requires some trusted setup, but people are improving on that with ZK stock.
So how long do you estimate your
My thing, I think it will be computing, people will be transacting on my system within 1 year. So a pharma will be doing some computing on the genomics data of the select population, let's say of 500,000, and be willing to pay for it, and we can prove that no privacy is leaked. Yeah.
I'd like to ask kind of political questions.
What kind of question?
Political.
Political question, yeah.
First, what is your expectation of what the Federal Reserve Board of the United States is going to do in the next years when the dollar is losing worldwide control? And secondly, what is your opinion on the recent Goldman Sachs decision?
Maybe I don't quite know about the Goldman Sachs decision, but I think on the large scale of things, I think eventually we should go back to, so we had the Bretton Woods system where every currency national currencies anchored on gold. I believe the future of the world will be every national currency will be anchored on Bitcoin. I think to have the reserve currency, to have one national currency to be the reserve currency of the world is an extremely unnatural state. That if it's a common denominator of all nations, it has to be something that's based on physics and mathematics, not based on the central bank of one particular government. So I can imagine a system like a Bretton Woods 2.0 instead of gold using Bitcoin, but national government can do fractional banking using the reserve currency, which is Bitcoin.
So reserve currencies, we see this battle between US dollars, who is kind of the global reserve currency at the moment, and then there's China coming up with so strong economy and might be overtaking, is already overtaking a lot of industries. And then the RMB might be kind of a reserve currency. But you say it could be Bitcoin as well.
Yeah, but no, I think it should be Bitcoin because it's not natural for a national government currency to become the reserve currency of the world.
Yeah, well, we should start with Liechtenstein as a...
No, but it should be something ideally completely objective. And that's why in math we trust. Math is objective.
It is objective, but the world that you described, I understood that we can have local organized...
so you can do fractional banking, right? Just like the relationship between Federal Reserve of a nation and the commercial banks of the nation, they do fractional banking.
Right.
So then it's a similar structure that something like Bitcoin can be the reserve currency, and the national currency, national fiat currency, can do reserve kind of fractional banking on top of it. Right. Depending on the economic growth, they can adjust the reserve ratio. But if they do two arbitrary things, then suddenly the currency will be in crisis. So I think we in the today's monetary world, we have M0, M1, M2, and so on. I think a similar structure will develop in the cryptocurrency world. There will be a M0, M1, and so on. I think Bitcoin only serves the purpose of M0. But there's the Lightning Network, which can be the M1, right? So I think this whole structure will be built.
Yeah. So apparently, seems that you are a big Bitcoin fan.
Well, I'm just taking this as an example, but the criteria I articulate is more general, that it has to be objective and should be physical and mathematical, and not on the human will, such as central bank.
Yeah, of course, but what do you think about the proof of work paradox, that we want a distributed system, but actually Bitcoin hashing power is in the hands of one big company?
Yeah, but this kind of thing can be solved by technology. No, well, I think proof of stake is a little bit subjective. I think ideally it should be solved by game theory. That right now we have mining pools, but if we have a system that people can cheat, actually it's in this system it's good to cheat on the mining pool. So if people can cheat on the mining pool, if I mine something and other partners of the mining pool cannot detect, then the mining pool cannot form. And if the mining pool cannot form, then they cannot be centralized. So that's why this field is so fascinating to me, because it requires all knowledge to be part of it. And game theory, as was in the original design, is part of it. So I'm looking into designing some kind of a protocol that makes mining pool very difficult to form for game theoretical reasons.
Okay, so you see in the future a more...
Yeah, so I think, so but I still a strong believer that kind of reserve currency of the world should be physical and mathematical and not human, not dependent on human will.
You spoke about a new sort of economic system forming in layers.
Yeah, it's M0, M1 and so on, yeah.
With potentially as Bitcoin as the
next
layer.
Yeah.
This is, it's like it's a new form of capital markets
emerging,
like on the crypto,
right?
So what role do you see financial instruments and sort of new crypto-native financial instruments playing within the wider economy.
So if we can look at the relationship between, let's say, Bitcoin and Lightning, right? So Lightning is a faster network, but so Bitcoin can establish universal trust because it's just math and physics. But then Lightning, let's say two of us already developed some long business relationship. We shouldn't be treated as like total stranger. So when you go from M0 to M1, we're supplementing a little bit, we're introducing more and more human elements into it, right? So if we already have been doing business for the last 10 years, we shouldn't be treated as total stranger. So two of us can open up a Lightning channel with collaterals anchored on Bitcoin. So I think that's a very good system. That, and then slowly, but the current world is already built like that, except there are arbitrary things like US dollar being the reserve currency, right? So I think that's to be, but to have, it's a very, very big thing to have the fundamental layer to be totally objective. So that's why I still see great potential in Bitcoin.
I think, Professor, that next time we have to arrange that you speak with the Liechtenstein authorities that are already open, and would love to hear from you all these ideas that are really pioneering and are at a different level, and they have to be embraced, right? Monty, you want to say something?
So I think we're wrapping up a little bit. So it was fantastic to listen to your talks and thoughts, and I think in math we trust. It's really kind of the underlying layer of the potential.
For the future of humanity.
Yeah. So and that's also kind of the vision which we are going to roll out. We are still at the beginning of something which is valuable for humanity on the long run. And so you joined as an advisor at the LCX for at least 3 years. So we started 3 months ago. So I can't really imagine what we will talk about in 3 years, because already so much happened and so much progress had been there. But I'm happy to re-invite you. Come here, and then we think about how in math we trust we could actually have built it already, like that we really build it based on this algorithm and mathematics formulas. So my pleasure to have you here, and then probably last but not least, it's talking about LCX blockchain sessions. Just to mention for all the audience, if you liked it, if you've been here in the past, and now it's the second time we're doing that. The first session was a month ago with ZZ from CEO of Binance. Now we have you, Professor Zhang, here from Stanford University, and this will keep going. We're trying to do that every month. So the next date, which is fully locked in already, is November 28th. You can mark down your calendars, invite your colleagues and friends. That's when Don Tapscott is coming, the best-selling author talking about blockchain revolution. And it's also a good moment to, if you don't want to convince people yourself, he can do it for you, so you can join here. But last but not least, what's your vision in like blockchain in 3 years, especially in the perspective of US and Europe and Asia? Who will take the lead?
I think Europe. I think Europe kind of missed the internet revolution, but I think blockchain is naturally adapted for a decentralized world. Europe is more decentralized than China and US, so there's big hope for Europe. If we do things properly, and I hope Europe doesn't miss it again. I think it's really, I think the internet and the mobile internet, China really did very well. China rode on the internet wave, but also the mobile payment, maybe China is most advanced in the world. But big government has some natural resistance against blockchain, and that's maybe the hope for Europe.
Professor, can we count on you if Europe is really the winner in blockchain, that you help us open the bridge over to China, who's leading the AI revolution, and then we get the symbiosis that you want. Thank you very much for bringing your vision, and thank you too for being with us.